Okay, so Julie pointed at me. It means I can start talking now. Welcome to Java with Jerry. It is Wednesday, May 16, 2018. We're happy that you're back with us and that you join us every Wednesday morning. We come to you, as always, from the penthouse suite of Stadium Towers here in the Platinum Triangle. We're right across from Angel Stadium, and we're always glad to have you come join us every Wednesday morning. So, like always, we will have a little bit of commentary about the news, but unlike always, we won't have a guest. We were going to have Dr. Richard Affable, who was the former CEO of St. Joseph, now I think it's called St. Joseph Hoag Healthcare System, and we were going to talk about a number of things, but unfortunately he had a conflict, couldn't make it this morning, so we will catch up with him another time. We have a bunch of questions to ask him about things he's doing and about healthcare system in Orange County, and we'll just have to pick it up another time. But we'll have some commentary on the news, as we always do, and a couple of extra stories thrown in to boot, and we'll talk a little bit about upcoming shows, and then we'll have our feature is How to Speak Millennial today, so that you boomers can keep up with the millennials in your offices. So, all that said, let's get to it. Oh, by the way, I will get in trouble with Julie, the producer, if I don't tell you. You can find all the previous episodes at orangesliced.com, and that's where you can also sign up if you want to take this as a podcast rather than watch it live on Facebook each Wednesday morning or catch up with it later at Orange Sliced. You can sign up, and it will come to your device from Podbean. You can sign up for little notices. It'll tell you when the next episode has been posted and send it right to your phone or laptop or computer, and bingo, you're watching Java with Jerry at your convenience, or listening to it at your convenience, I should say, whenever you want to, whether you're in the gym, walking your dog, or you're just lonely on a Saturday night. What can I say? All right, let's talk a little bit about news. The big news, obviously, this week, and you're hearing tons of it, and I'm sure you heard it this morning, and I'll give you a little commentary about it from my point of view, is that Donald Trump kept his promise and opened the embassy of the United States in Jerusalem, Israel's capital. It has been promised by many, many presidents before. I think at least the last three have promised it. Bush and Obama promised it, and I believe that even Clinton promised to move it, and nobody did, but now Donald Trump has. And of course, people are trying to link in the news the violence in Gaza with the opening of the embassy. I have to tell you, I have issues with that. I have issues, frankly, with Hamas sending women to the gates where they were told not to be. There were leaflets dropped by the Israelis warning them that if they came toward the gates anywhere near that area in Gaza, that they would be repelled back and not to do it. And of course, they put women up front and move them out there because they want sympathetic targets when the violence occurs. And they sent them up there with bombs. You don't protest with bombs, Hamas. That's not a protest. That's just violence. And so, of course, there's this clash with Israel. I don't think it really has anything to do with the embassy. I think Hamas, as an agent of Iran, is more concerned about the president pulling out of the Iranian nuke deal than they are about the opening of the embassy. If it was really about the embassy, the Palestinians in the West Bank would be protesting, and they would be joining in all of this, and the West Bank is not having any of that. It's only in Hamas-controlled Gaza, which they've controlled for the last 10 years, that you see all this violence. So anyway, shame on Hamas and all of those who want to foment discord in the Middle East, and congratulations to Israel on its 70th anniversary, finally getting the U.S. Embassy where it belongs in its capital. On the other hand, I do have to say it is interesting to watch mainstream media do a split screen where they will show Ivanka Trump attending the opening of the embassy, smiling and being cordial, and on the other split side of the screen they show the violence and women and protesters being repelled back by Israeli forces and being shot. And it's as if they are showing her as smiling to that event, which she's not. She is, of course, representing the United States at a happy event when we open our embassy. Anyway, big news back there going on. Still violence today, and it's really more about the Iran deal than it is about the embassy. On another national note, there is also some noise now that maybe Kim Jong-un will cancel his meeting in June with the president. I guess it has to do with some dispute he's having with the South about military exercises, and I think he thinks he's held out an olive branch and now he's got some leverage. And so keep your eye on whether or not this happens on June 12th. That would be an interesting day, by the way, if they met on June 12th, because that is the same day that Reagan stood at the Brandenburg Gate and told Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. So it's an interesting date in history to have a meeting on June 12th between people, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. All right, let's move to state news. I think many of you know that CalPERS is the California pension system for California employees, called the California Pension Employee Retirement System, and we shorten it to CalPERS. Deeply in trouble because of the formulas that we have used for years and the manner in which we've given benefits to public employee unions. It is now probably $1 trillion in debt, right? Well, the news came out this week that a gentleman by the name of Ted Iliopoulos, I hope I say that correctly, Ted, is the man responsible for investing for the last 5 years in the CalPERS system. So he's been investing the pension funds that have been deposited with them. And of course, it's still desperately in debt, even though he's had some good years. Last year, I think he got an 11% return, which is pretty unheard of. But in some years, he fell far below their 7% target. Nonetheless, it's $1 trillion in debt. Well, Ted is retiring after a 5-year stint in a volatile marketplace with lots of swings, and he's headed to New York City, where he's going to take up residence. He's got a couple of daughters in college back there, so congratulations to him. By the by, Ted's salary last year for managing this fund, which is so deeply in debt, was $543,000. That was his base salary. Then he got a little bonus, $314,000 in bonus. Nice bonus, Ted. So for a total of $857,000. So I'm asking all you CalPERS recipients who are wondering about the future of your pension, was Ted a good investment? Anyway, go off and enjoy your retirement, Ted. Local news. This is not good news. And next week we're going to have a guest, and we'll talk a little bit about our guests in the upcoming shows shortly, but we're going to have guests from the California Apartment Association, and we want to talk about the crunch on housing. Well, here's a story about the crunch on housing. According to the California Association of Realtors and their affordability index, it's the CAR, California Association of Realtors Housing Affordability Index, a typical financing of a home in Orange County, median price home, typical financing 20% down, mortgage just under 4.5% on a 30-year fixed, will require an annual salary of, are you ready for this? $167,670. That's right. You have to bring in a family income of $168,670, just slightly under $168,000 to afford the median price home, because it's somewhere up in the 800s. And using their index figures, you got to be able to hack a $4,190 mortgage payment, and I suppose that's the mortgage payment on a median price home before you get homeowners association dues, utilities, or taking care of any of the maintenance. So with those numbers, only 21% of Orange County's households, 21%, 1 in 5 people could afford to buy a home. Yikes, that's really a serious issue. And of course, where there's pressure on home purchase, there's always pressure on rental as well, and that's not a good story for our millennials. And we talk all the time about the fact that we are bleeding our young professionals, and one of the reasons we are is they can't afford to live here. They can't afford to have the lifestyle that they want for their families or to build a family when you got to earn $168,000 to buy a median-priced home. And that's if you can find one, because there's such a housing shortage. That's why there's a price pressure. So next week, I will give you a preview of coming attractions. We're having a vice president from the California Apartment Association, Matt Buck, who's going to come in. We were going to have my friend Tommy Thompson, but unfortunately, he's traveling on business because the Apartment Association is fighting back a rent control effort. Look, I don't want to get sidelined too much from what we were going to talk about, but since we're on housing anyway, if the affordability of housing is a problem, and it is, doing some of the things we're doing, like last week when I talked about mandating solar on homes, raises the cost of a home. So now that home that was $800,000 just became $810,000 because you mandated solar. And the utility bills that would have normally been high anyway are now going to be $20,000 a year higher because you're making them purchase this equipment and finance it and buy renewables, which is an inexpensive form of energy. So let's get serious about what we're doing. Rent control on apartments doesn't make apartments more plentiful. It makes them more scarce. When you tell a landlord who's got an investment, they build these homes not for pleasure, they do it because it's an investment and they want a return on their dollars. So they get a construction loan, they build the product, they rent it out to people, and the delta between their cost, their mortgage, and their expenses for upkeep and management and what they charge in rent is what they get as a return on the investment, and they return to their shareholders or to their partners, right? So it's a business venture to build an apartment building. When you tell them, I'm going to control your rent, what do? You drive them away to go build in places where there are no controls. They build less of them. That makes more apartments unavailable, and that makes apartments more scarce. When something is scarce, it gets pricier. So what do you think happens to rents on all other market products when you've got rent control? They go up. You get less of anything you tax. So get serious, California. Don't keep driving away our young professionals. It's not a good formula for your economy. It's not great for them and their families, and we got to get serious about what we do about affordability. All right. So another story. This one I picked up just today and saw and needed to talk about it. This is one of those places in which we take something to the legal system that really doesn't belong there because it's really a decision that ought to be made in some other arena. Now, let me tell you what I'm talking about. A Riverside judge just overturned California's right to die law. In a case that was presented to him, he made the ruling. Many of you will remember Brittany Maynard, who was a 29-year-old who moved to Oregon in 2014 to take advantage of what Oregon called the Death with Dignity Act that they had, which allowed someone to make a decision to take their own life if they were terminally ill and facing a very painful passing. And so in November of 2014, November 1st actually of 2014, Brittany Maynard, a young 29-year-old woman who had a vibrant life, but unfortunately had terminal brain cancer, took her own life under that law. That sparked a huge discussion. It was all over the media, and the net result was that in 2016, California passed what it called the End of Life Option Act, which allowed Californians to opt in to take their own life if they were terminally ill. The act requires approval from 2 physicians, and it requires a 15-day waiting period between the 2 oral requests. So the patient who is terminally ill themselves has to make the request to a doctor. They have to wait 15 days after that request and receiving approval from a physician to go and ask a second physician, and then that second physician has to give permission. Then the patient is entitled to the drugs that would terminate their life. But the patient must be of sound mind and must administer their own drug under the act. So the Department of Public Health released statistics from last year. I know you're interested, all right, now that we've had this law in 2016, what was the net result? For the second half of 2016, 191 terminally ill individuals obtained lethal prescriptions from 173 different doctors. And 111 of those 191 people actually used the drug to end their lives. Now, California is among 7 states and the District of Columbia that has a right to die laws. So those include Colorado, Montana, the aforementioned Oregon, Vermont, Washington, Hawaii, of course, California, and the District of Columbia. So what's the opposition? Many people oppose this thing for philosophical reasons. They don't believe that life should be terminated under any circumstances except by the hand of God. And the challenges come from a variety of places, including doctors who are concerned about the liability of being one of those 2 physicians or carrying the moral responsibility to make that decision in concert with the patients. So doctors have argued that first, the law was passed in a rush in an extraordinary session of the legislature. You'll remember back in 2016, because of a variety of other things, we were in 2 separate extraordinary sessions of the legislature. That means they weren't regular sessions in the due course of our legislative life. And they argue, these doctors and their lawyers who argue on behalf of the doctors, look, in 20 previous attempts during regular sessions when there was time for debate and the committees could work the bills and the like, the right to die laws were turned down. You rushed it through in an extraordinary session as a knee-jerk reaction to what happened with Brittany Maynard, and you wanted to make sure that terminally ill patients had this right in California, and so you rushed to judgment, and it should have gone through due course. I'm not sure if that argument is going to prevail, but they also argued that the standards are unclear for a doctor. What does being of sound mind mean? They don't know if they really have the skill sets to be able to know if someone is really making a sound decision, or is it influenced by the pain they're in or the fear of the demise they face. And so they make these arguments. And they also talk about the vulnerability of the elderly. As we get older, we get more and more confused. It's easier to be influenced by some who want to make decisions for us rather than making them ourselves. And they argued that the elderly who at that time of life need the most protections are the least protected from making bad decisions. So that's the argument against it. On the other hand, you have people like Deborah Ziegler, who is Brittany Maynard's mom, who said that Brittany told her, this is the legacy I'm leaving you. I'm not leaving you grandchildren, but I'm leaving you the legacy of a right to die fight and that law in California that we hope will come from her passing. So why do I say this doesn't belong in the legal system? Just the description I gave you of what happened, and who knows what the premise was for the Riverside judge decision in reality to say that the law was inappropriate. You'd have to read the entire opinion to get that. But just in the description I gave you, you see the legal conundrum that the courts and frankly lawyers and even doctors find themselves in. These are decisions that ought to be made by patients and ought to be made in their own way. It is not a decision which is really easily handled by a doctor. The medical systems aren't set up to assist in death. The patients certainly in some cases are suffering. And how can a judge sit and determine in a general way what should apply in each individual case? It's so difficult. These are really tough decisions to be made, and you can see the arguments on both sides. Nonetheless, a Riverside judge has made that decision. The lawyers for the doctors, who are the ones who brought the case in Riverside, say they're going to appeal. And who knows where all of this is going to go? We will find out in due course, but we'll keep an eye on that one. And I actually had pulled that story and wanted to talk about it a little bit because we were going to have a doctor, a practicing physician who actually was an administrator for a hospital system, to talk about the conundrum that exists in the state. So that was that story, and it was part of the cards that I had for doctors. So let me flip through them and get through. And let's talk a little bit now, because I have the liberty to do it, about future shows, because we have some great shows coming for you. And I took a little time to look ahead and take a peek, and we don't talk about it very much, and so I thought I'd use this opportunity to do that and give you previews of coming attractions. So whether or not my producers, the ladies, are going to be angry with me, here's what's coming. Next week I mentioned we're going to have Matt Buck. Matt Buck is a vice president of the California Apartment Association, and their Orange County chapter is a place where he works with my friend Tommy Thompson. These guys really understand what's going on with housing. We obviously talked a little bit this morning about the pressures on millennials to try to stay in Orange County, and want to talk to them about apartment building. I think everywhere you look, you see them putting up as much product as possible, and yet the prices are out of control. So let's talk to Matt about what his apartment association is doing and about this threat that they face with rent control. Not a good idea. Then, following that, we will have in future weeks Jim Leach, who is the government relations guru at the Santa Margarita Water District in South County. As many of you know, Orange County is blessed to have an aquifer under it, and in the central part of the county, the water table actually provides through wells a great deal of groundwater, and we replenish it through some brilliant programming done by the Orange County Water District and the Orange County Sanitation District down in Fountain Valley in Water Factory 21 and other ancillary facilities where we're constantly recharging the water basin with water that we reclaim from rain and other sources. They come from the Anaheim percolating ponds down into the aquifer, and then we pull them from wells, and it's all formulary. Well, Jim represents the Santa Margarita Water District, which is in South County, and they don't have that blessing. They're not sitting over that aquifer. So almost every ounce of water in South County, especially south of the Y, Irvine South, is water that they have to purchase from some source. They either get it from the Colorado River, they get it from the State Water Project, they buy it from some other source. And so we want to talk to Jim Leach about water policy. You know that there's a big effort to a water bond on the election ballot coming up this year, and there's also some discussion. The governor's been a big fan of water tunnels coming out of the State Water Project to bring more Northern California water, which comes out of the Sierras down to Southern California. So we'll talk to Jim about water policy. It's a huge thing in California, and it'll be a big focus this year. In following weeks, Brian Starr, the brilliant leader of the now Greater Irvine Chamber. I smile because I was president of the Irvine Chamber once upon a time, but we were just the Irvine Chamber then. Now they're the Greater Irvine Chamber, and in fact, he has a big responsibility, and it is a very vibrant, active business community. You want to talk to Brian about the things he's doing. It's really focused a lot on international trade, especially high-tech, biotech, biomed stuff. We had the mayor of Irvine in, as you recall, and Don Wagner talked about his trip overseas with Brian and others and the efforts that they're making. So we'll talk to Brian about all things going on in South County. In weeks to come after that, Jay Barrest, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Visit Anaheim, which once upon a time was called the Anaheim Visitors and Convention Bureau, is responsible for running the largest convention center in the Western United States. It is larger than San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles, or anything else in the West. And so we want to talk to Jay about what's going on with conventions in Anaheim, about tourism to Southern California, and certainly about the impact of the efforts by the president on trade and what that has done to tourism, and also local efforts, what's going on in Anaheim with minimum wage efforts and what that might do to industries and how it might affect tourism. So Jay is a brilliant guy. We'll have him in and talk to him about what's going on. And then Chip Monaco, my friend from Waste Management, is coming in. Chip is a very interesting guy. He has served in county government in dealing with all kinds of issues, including waste. And then he has served in the private sector, where he is now government relations director. Wow, did my time go by so quickly? Holy mackerel, I got to rush, and I'm just babbling today. Chip is now government relations manager for Waste Management, one of the largest waste and recycling companies in the Western United States, maybe even in the United States. We'll ask him when he's here. And Chip not only does all of that, but he's also president of the Orange County Taxpayers Association, where I serve on the board with him, a brilliant leader there in tax policy. And now he is a declared candidate for city council in Orange, which means he fell out of bed and bumped his head really hard. And we'll ask him about his venture out of private life back into the public, but this time as an elected official. Wow, a lot of shows coming up, and I didn't get to all the stuff I wanted to talk about because, of course, I ran out of time. But I don't want to leave without talking about our features. I know that you enjoy these, and one of your faves is to do this one that we're doing today, How to Speak Millennial. It's where we teach boomers how to speak to all the people around you have in your professional life and people in your family who are millennial, because they have their own lexicon and jargon. And I don't want you to be uneducated, right? So here is your word for today. It's shook. I'm shook. Spelled S-H-O-O-K, or a derivation of it if you're really going to get fancy and say, I'm shooketh. So what does it mean? I'm shook can be a way of you're saying you're shaken up in a good way or even in a bad way. It can mean you're confused, flabbergasted, surprised, just rattled by something. Examples are, the drugstore foundation looks way better than I thought it would. I'm so shook right now. Or that news has really got me shook. Or in my case, it takes $168,000 to buy a median home in Orange County, and we're losing all our young professionals. I'm so shooketh. So add shook to your millennial lexicon. Now you can talk like a brilliant millennial. Remember to send us any suggestions you have for millennial words, and we'll add them to the lexicon if my millennials here approve. They are the final arbiters of what's truly millennial. Let's get with it, right? And don't send me any stories unless it's a dumb criminal story. I want those. Make sure you're sending those as well. So millennial words, dumb criminal stories, and if you have something that you think really qualifies for our third feature, which is you can't make this stuff up, you can send that as well. We will be back next week. We will have Matt Buck. He will be talking about the housing crisis and God knows what else. We will bring you up to speed on the news. Maybe we'll follow up on some of these cases that we'll be following. In the meantime, we want you to have a good week, be productive, make good decisions, don't be too shooketh, and we will see you next Wednesday for another episode of Java with Jerry. Hey.